Morning. Good morning. The hearing board is in session. Today is Tuesday, March 28th, 2017. We're meeting in the hearing room at SCAQMD headquarters. Time is 9:08. We have one change to the calendar this morning. Chevron Products Company case 831-387 has been taken off calendar. And we have to consider today Costco Wholesale Corporation, Costco, case 5055-8. Who is representing Costco this morning?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Michael McDonough from Pillsbury.
Thank you. And representing the executive officer?
Nancy S. Feldman for the executive officer.
Those who will be testifying, please rise to be sworn in. Raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Opening, Mr. McDonough.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Michael McDonough. I'm here from Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman, and I'm here on behalf of Costco today, their Tustin facility in furtherance of their petition for short variance. Costco seeking relief from District Rule 203B and Condition 27 of its permit to operate in order to continue to operate for the last now 2 days of March and save emissions by doing so. I'm here with Mr. Tim Herlocker, who is Costco's Director of Fuel Quality and Compliance. You will hear in the testimony today that short variance relief is necessary because the facility anticipates it will not be able to reasonably avoid exceeding its permitted gasoline throughput limit of roughly 1.6 million gallons before the end of this month in March. The facility's March sales are now on a pace to exceed that number as soon as tomorrow. As you'll hear in Mr. Herlocker's testimony, the high gasoline volume this month is due to two factors. One, to unexpectedly high gas demand Costco's been experiencing the past few weeks, but also a longer-term sales trend that's forced Costco to seek a permit revision to seek a higher throughput limit. Costco does not control the gasoline market, nor does it control prevailing gasoline demand in the South Coast. So as a result, for the past year, Costco has wanted to apply for a permit revision to increase its allowable gas throughput and avoid exactly this type of situation. In fact, you'll hear in testimony that new gas station emissions factors approved by California Air Resources Board, or CARB, in 2013 would allow Costco to both increase its throughput while actually decreasing its facility emissions. But the district informed Costco that it would not be in a position to consider a permit revision application until the Association of Air District Control Officers, an organization called SCAQMD, also approved the emissions factors, and that didn't occur until January of this year. So with SCAQMD approval, Costco was finally able to submit a permit application to the district in February to increase its gas throughput limit. So as we speak, the district is finishing up work on that revised permit, and we expect to see it soon, but unfortunately not before the facility likely exceeds its 1.6 million gallon limit for March. So we've come to the board to request a short variance from the current threshold to allow operation through this coming Friday, March 31st, which would allow the facility to continue serving gasoline customers without forcing them to drive elsewhere for gas and create additional criteria and toxic pollution in the South Coast. As you'll hear in the testimony, it is beyond Costco's reasonable control to comply because the district was not in a position to even consider a permit revision application until January of this year when SCAQMD approved the new emissions factors. SCAQMD's approval process is beyond Costco's control. So is the district's decision not to entertain a permit revision application until SCAQMD approved those factors. And despite Costco filing permit application promptly, and despite the diligent work of the district, which is ongoing to process the permit application, the revised permit will not be issued before the end of March. You will also hear that while Costco could technically close the Tustin facility entirely to stay in strict compliance, you'll hear that such an action would cause significant harm to Costco's customers and would not have a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. In fact, you're going to hear that the closure would actually result in increased emissions to the South Coast air basin as thousands of customers, maybe as many as 10,000 or more, would be forced to drive elsewhere to get gas. And we believe there's no benefit to the public or the environment in requiring that strict compliance if it creates thousands of additional vehicle miles and the criteria and toxic pollutions that come along with it. In addition, to these increased miles, Costco would also suffer over $500,000 in lost gasoline sales, but would also suffer significant losses in same-store sales from its members, losses in future sales, and memberships from customers who count on being able to get low-cost gasoline from Costco, and likely some permanent loss of reputation among Costco's members who will not be receiving the convenience and service they pay for in their Costco membership. Costco's customers, many of whom are low income and of limited means, would also face significant hardship and delays associated with having to make additional trips to get gasoline, and by having to pay a premium for that gasoline somewhere else, maybe as much as 20 to 40 cents additional per gallon. So Costco believes it's unreasonable to require strict compliance where doing so would actually increase emissions in the South Coast Air Basin and cause harm to the environment and residents of the South Coast. As you'll hear in testimony, the variance would not cause any exceedance of an emission limit. It would simply ask for relief from the throughput limit on gasoline to allow continued operation through Friday. But these emissions for these 2 days technically would be considered excess emissions since the facility would be emitting a very small amount of emissions while operating beyond its throughput limit. We've conservatively estimated those excess emissions to be roughly 31.9 pounds of VOC per day, using the updated emissions factors from CARB. That comes out to less than 80 pounds for the entire 2-day period. In reality, however, forcing Costco to shut down will not avoid those emissions. Those emissions will simply happen at another gas station as members go elsewhere to refuel. And indeed, denying the variance today would actually cause more emissions as members will make tens of thousands of additional vehicle mile trips to create additional tailpipe emissions, additional criteria, and toxic pollution in the air basin. Costco is already employing significant mitigation measures on its emissions from the gas station. You'll hear in testimony Phase 1 and Phase 2 emission controls, as well as in-station diagnostics controls, which together serve to control 95 to 98% of the emissions that come out of the facility. These are very well-controlled gas stations. As you'll hear, Costco will also continue complying with District Rule 461. It will continue to operate all of its enhanced vapor recovery equipment, and it will continue to work with the district to expedite its permit issuances as much as possible. And finally, Costco will also report all of the emissions and additional gallons sold during this 2-day period. So for these reasons, we respectfully request that the board grant the short variance. Thank you.
Ms. Feldman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the board. First and foremost, I would like to thank 2 people here this morning. One is Dr. Lerner for being late. My gratitude will...
That's on the record.
I think anybody watching can see that we started late today, and I do appreciate it. My gratitude will become... The reason for my gratitude will become obvious in just a minute. And the other is to Mr. McDonough for very generously providing me with a copy of the petition when I arrived in the hearing room, his own personal copy of the petition. The attorney who was assigned to this matter not only could not come in today because she injured her ankle and cannot drive, but in her zeal to be prepared this morning, she took the file home with her over the weekend. And so when I arrived this morning, I not only was put in the position of having to cover for the variance, but I had no file. So I hurriedly met with district staff to get the heads up, and was able, thanks to Dr. Lerner's delay in traffic, to actually read the petition before we start. So I am a little bit at a disadvantage this morning, and I do request your understanding and perhaps indulgence if I'm not as sharp as I should be. But I do have several concerns already about this petition and the case as it's going to be presented. I understand the reasons why Costco can say that the processing of the permit and the submission of the permit application may be beyond their reasonable control because of CAPCOA's delayed approval of CARB emission factors and the district's failure to date evaluate the permit application. However, what I need to hear in order to adopt a position of non-opposition on this variance is why they can continue to comply with the throughput limit that has been on their permit for so long, and why they are not availing themselves of other means by which to comply with that limit pending resolution on their permit. And I intend to ask pertinent questions if that's not presented proactively in testimony. As for the permit application itself, it's not as simple as Mr. McDonough portrayed. CARB did, in fact, put forth new emission factors for gasoline dispensing facilities. However, the district has not fully evaluated the merit of those factors and, in fact, has serious reservations about whether they are appropriate. If it's necessary to get to that level of inquiry during the course of this particular variance hearing, I do have someone from engineering to testify as to that. But I do anticipate at this point that Costco will not be able to provide sufficient evidence to satisfy the beyond reasonable control finding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're calling Mr. Tim Herlocker, who's been sworn. Mr. Herlocker, could you please state for the record your full name and spell your last name?
Tim Herlocker, last name H-U-R-L-O-C-K-E-R.
And what is your position with Costco?
I'm the Director of Fuel Quality and Compliance. Been with Costco Gasoline for 20 years, with the company 27 years.
Okay, and are you familiar with the petition that we filed and can confirm to the board that it correctly reflects the facts of the case?
Yes, and it does.
Okay. I'd like for you to help the board understand through a brief overview why we're seeking a short variance today.
You recapped it very well. We're most urgently trying to avoid shutdown of our Tustin facility so we don't break trust with our members who count on getting a great price for fuel. That's why we're so popular, is we save the public a lot of money on fuel. That, as Mike said, that particularly affects our disadvantaged members and people who have fuel be a large part of their budget. Nationally, we saved last year customers on an average 20 cents a gallon. Market conditions dictate how much margin we can offer, but we do a great service to the community in providing a low price for fuel, and we do it in a very clean way. I think your inspectors would confirm that Costco gas stations are as well maintained as any that they inspect.
Okay, so could you provide the board with a brief description of the gasoline dispensing facility at Tustin and particularly its controls?
Yes, Tustin has three 30,000-gallon fuel tanks, and it has enhanced vapor recovery, both phase 1 and phase 2, and is compliant with Rule 461, which includes daily inspections of the vapor control equipment, and all of that is well maintained, as I mentioned.
And could you briefly summarize for the board, what is a phase 1 control?
Phase 1 is during fuel delivery. When the truck is offloading its fuel, the displaced vapor from the underground storage tanks is routed back to the truck to prevent it from being vented to the atmosphere.
Okay, and similarly, can you give a brief summary of phase 2 vapor recovery?
Phase 2 is where gasoline is displaced from the customer's vehicle, and therefore it's captured by a recovery method that goes through the hose from each fueling transaction.
So these are controls at the pump itself?
Yes.
Okay. And could you also explain briefly the concept of in-station diagnostics to the board?
Yes, in-station diagnostics was one of the key elements of enhanced vapor recovery implemented in the mid-2000s throughout the state. What it does is continuously monitor the vapor recovery systems, both phase 1 and phase 2, And so it exchanges periodic testing for continuous monitoring and alarms when something fails. And that's why the efficiency rate for both phase 1 and phase 2 is so high, is because it's continuously high, or the ISD system would tell us otherwise, sound an alarm and potentially shut the entire station down were those alarms not addressed promptly.
So this entire control equipment together, phase 1, phase 2, ISD, fair to say that that equipment produces a 95 to 98% control efficiency?
Yes.
Okay, could you also talk about the benefits of Costco gasoline dispensing facilities to the environment? In other words, why is it better for the environment for the public to refuel at Costco instead of other gas stations?
A couple of reasons. First, very well maintained because we have a great relationship with our employees. They stay a long time. We train them well. Every gas station, a Costco gas station, has a person who's taken a training course and a test before they work a minute out there. And the other, so it's all working as well as it could be working per the state requirements. The other thing is that we aggressively treat spills, and spillage is part of the emissions factors calculation. And so by having a person out there 100% of the time that's trained, and we have a spill response that picks the fuel up immediately, neutralizes it from vaporizing. So we think our spillage number is far better than industry averages, or that reflected even in the state's lower emissions factors.
Were Costco facilities even a basis for CARB's study of the new factors?
Yes, one of our Sacramento locations was one of the 10 locations monitored for the calculations done that resulted in the CARB study in 2013.
Could you also explain to the board the benefits of Costco's use of what's called top-tier gasoline?
Yes, Top Tier is a voluntary association by the auto manufacturers who think that gasoline should have more detergent additives to keep their engines running cleaner over the life of the vehicle. We subscribe to that, and in fact, we went further. We are Top Tier as of 2014 throughout the country. We started that program in 2010. So the fuel is keeping the car's engines on the inside very clean, and therefore their emission ratings are as close to a new car rating as technology will allow. We actually went beyond Top Tier because we did our own engine testing at some big labs in Texas and figured, well, we want to put the additive amount in that had the very best benefit. And so it's about 5 times the federal standard of detergent additive, and we have that at all of our locations.
Maybe you could also explain to the board the environmental benefits of providing your members a single location where they can both do their grocery and other shopping and also refuel.
Well, yeah, that's a huge benefit for Costco is what's called a destination shop. People set out from their home to go to Costco. And so we wanted to save our members the time and effort of having to make another stop, driving to another location to buy their fuel. And so there's a synergy of you're coming there for the warehouse, the chickens or whatever, and you're coming there for fuel all on the same trip, and that minimizes the additional miles needed to be driven.
Roughly speaking, how many members per day come through Tustin to refuel?
Over 4,000 a day.
Okay. So all of these measures you described, the phase 1, phase 2, ISD, top-tier gas certification, and of course the fact that you're providing a single destination for gasoline and grocery shopping and other shopping, how do you believe that all adds up in terms of Costco's emissions profile versus other gas stations?
Well, you left out our trained and certified attendants. I'm very loyal to them. That's our real difference, is that we have somebody out there making sure that everything's working right. Because of those capable people, I would say that we're the best there is operationally. Obviously, I'm a little biased in that, but I truly believe that to be the case over 20 years' time. Because those people are out there making sure that people are shutting off their engines, everything is safe, cleaning up spills. Everybody in the South Coast and throughout California is subject to the same technologies and phase 1 and phase 2 controls, but we maintain them well, and I think we're as good as it gets operationally.
Okay, so you heard the question from Ms. Feldman about the central question she has, which is why is it that Costco can't comply with its permitted throughput limit? So let's talk about that. Can you explain to the board, why does Costco expect to be out of the compliance with its permitted limit by the end of March?
Because we're selling a lot of gallons. Part of that is dictated by market forces. Gas prices are rising. Typically, when prices rise and it starts to pinch budgets, members will find a way to make it to Costco to refuel. Typically, our gallons rise as prices rise because we have that great trust and reputation of providing the best price in the market. So our experience of our sales growth in gasoline is far outstripping the national demand numbers just because we have that low price philosophy.
Is gasoline demand at Tustin higher than it was when Tustin originally received the permit with this limit?
Yes, it's grown remarkably.
Okay. When was it that Costco was convinced that demand in March was now on a trajectory to exceed the maximum limit?
I think it was in the first couple days of March.
Is there any way for Costco to know precisely ahead of time that it's definitely going to exceed a gasoline throughput threshold?
No, not precisely. We have some good budgeting technologies and some real discipline in that and a lot of experience, but it's still dependent on who's coming by and what their motivations are, and there's thousands of people every day, so it'd be hard to characterize.
Okay, but you did talk about demand being fundamentally higher now than it was when you originally received this permit limit. What has Costco tried to do to accommodate this new high demand at Tustin?
We've expanded the station a few years ago. What we don't want to do is limit our ability to serve our members, because ultimately that's the number one goal. Is we charge a membership fee. People trust that they're going to get the value that they're buying with that fee, and we just hate to let them down.
And has Costco looked into actually revising the permit to allow for a higher limit?
Yes, we've been pursuing that, and we've been asking for additional throughput as our demand has risen.
Now, would the proposed permit revision actually increase emissions at Tustin?
I don't think so, because of the emissions factors from CARB are far, far lower than what have been used to calculate those throughputs in our permit.
So for the board's benefit, if you could explain briefly the idea of an emission factor being a way to convert a gallon of gasoline into emissions.
Right. The Air Resource Board sets factors on 4 major categories of fuel retailing, which are phase 1, phase 2, delivery and refueling, also tank pressure emissions and spillage. So those 4 elements, I think those are the primary 4, each have an estimate as to how much pollution they contribute on a per gallon basis. And then that per gallon basis is extrapolated to give a throughput limit. And so the throughput limit is an indirect way of limiting total emissions based on those factors.
Okay, and so you talked about the CARB factors. These are factors that CARB revised in December 2013 to reflect how much emissions came out of an average gallon of gas using these controls?
Yes. In the introduction to that study, it explicitly says that the Enhanced Vapor Recovery Initiative that unfolded throughout the mid-2000 decade had never been quantified, and the benefits assessed formally with data, and that's what the study was for. So the industry, including Costco, paid vast sums to upgrade our system to things like in-station diagnostics and enhanced nozzles and a number of different things. And so this study was to capture the benefit to the environment from that major initiative of the Air Resource Board.
So if CARB adopted these new statewide emissions factors for gas stations in 2013, why didn't Costco seek a new permit then?
We did, but not, those emissions factors hadn't been adopted by the various districts, and we were told that we were waiting for CAPCOA to weigh in on them.
Did the district tell you that they were in any position to accept a permit application before CAPCOA approval?
I don't know about accept, but not necessarily approve. Yeah, because the emissions factors had not been integrated into the permitting process in the district.
Okay, and did CAPCOA finally adopt the CARB's new emissions factors?
My understanding is in late January,
Okay, and that allowed you to finally submit your permit application to the district?
about a week later, as I recall.
Okay. Has the district approved these new CARB emissions factors yet?
Apparently not. We kind of got conflicting information. We thought that they had approved something in between the former and what the Air Resource Board advocated and CAPCO approved that was still substantially lower, but apparently that's still up in the air a little bit.
So Costco's application using these new factors is still under consideration, hasn't been granted yet?
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
Did Costco have any reasonable control over CAPCOA's approval process on the new gas station emission factors?
No, CAPCOA closed their meetings to industry several years ago. We used to go all the time, but I don't have any insight into their process anymore.
Okay. Does Costco have any reasonable control over the district's process in reviewing the permit and issuing it before the end of March?
Other than our consultant bothering Randy all the time, no, we wait for the process to unfold.
And does Costco have any reasonable control over market demand at its gas stations every day?
No, the market prices of gasoline are beyond all of us.
So can't Costco just raise prices and reduce the amount of gasoline it sells?
No, that would break trust with our members. They pay a fee for us to know that they're always going to get the best possible price we can deliver to them. That's how we're different than a normal retailer. That membership is a very sacred trust to us. The old adage that trust is hard to earn but easily lost. We are not going to jeopardize our trust of our members.
And even if prices were raised, what is Costco's experience with the relationship between price and demand at its facility? In other words, is it always the case that when the price goes up, demand goes down?
No, not demand to Costco. It's important to distinguish between demand for us offering a great price and demand generally. Our demand curve is different than the industries for that reason. Typically, when prices go up, people will beat a path to our door because it's pinching their budgets, and we're eager to serve them.
Is it somehow possible for Costco to adopt, say, other types of temporary emissions controls to ensure compliance with its throughput limit and avoid this variance?
Not that I would know readily, because California has the most advanced emissions controls already that, in fact, things are invented to meet the requirements in California. So I don't know of any technology out there that would substantially improve it, other than, issues that we're working on with the Air Resource Board involving certifications, but nothing certified currently.
So if Costco is denied this variance today, what would be the result in terms of emissions to the environment?
Well, I think they would rise. I'm not an engineer, but you would have maybe 10,000 people driving multiple miles to buy gas elsewhere with stations that use the same controls but may not be as well maintained. But most importantly, getting out in the streets, increasing traffic, creating emissions from driving around.
What about, say, reducing hours or curtailing operations? Is there any way to Costco to avoid the need for a variance just by reducing hours as opposed to shutting down?
Not at this late date. It wouldn't be sufficient. Were we to know well in advance, we could consider that, but our hours are posted on our website. Our members know that we're open. They count on us being open when they come by early in the morning and need to fuel up before they get to work or on their way home. There's no way we can communicate with just that location's membership because our members are fluid. They shop at multiple locations frequently, especially in a market like Los Angeles where we have so many facilities.
So what about just shutting down? Isn't shutting down within Costco's control?
Yes, it is, and we have done that before, and frankly disappointed our members. We turn them our way, like I said, at the tune of $4,000 a day on average at this location. And we feel like it breaks trust with them.
And what would happen from an emissions perspective if the variance were denied and you were forced to shut down for 2 days?
I would have to expect our members would go elsewhere.
And what would be the emissions impact if your members, maybe more than 10,000 transactions, were forced to drive elsewhere for gas?
Well, tens of thousands of additional vehicle miles,
And the emissions that come along with them?
and the emissions that come along with them, sure.
So when we speak of conditions beyond your reasonable control, do you believe it's reasonable to expect strict compliance in this situation if strict compliance would result in increased emissions to the environment and harm to your members?
Not with the lower emissions factors, no.
What would happen, let's say, in terms of Costco's revenue? What would be the lost economic revenue to Costco by shutting down for these 2 days?
I think the estimate was about $500,000 in sales. I'm not sure what the margin is currently, but that's not our focus anyway. It's serving the member, because in the long run, it's that membership trust that keeps them renewing, being our member on into the future. That's what we're trying to preserve here.
Okay, so let's talk about the harm to members. What about that harm to Costco's members, some of whom you said are low-income members?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things I feel personally, and have for so long, but it's true of the entire company. We offer a great price on high-quality merchandise. We think our fuel is the highest possible quality, and we give all our members of whatever income level access to the very highest quality fuel, best for the environment, at a very substantial discount to the market. Last year, there was a nationwide study that said our advantage in price averaged 20 cents a gallon. And again, that's dependent on market forces. It goes up and down in different parts of the country, but 20 cents a gallon for a disadvantaged household is big money.
What about loss of potential customer loyalty or memberships? Is that a possibility if members can't refuel?
That's the number one reason in my mind, is when people pull up with their gauge on E, man, they want to get their gas, and they want to pay that low price, and they're going to be disappointed when they leave, and that hurts us.
Is it possible to even put a money estimate on the possibility of lost members and memberships over a long period of time?
Well, if they feel like we're not a reliable source for fuel, they will go elsewhere. Yeah, so it is an opportunity for them to test our competition. So in a strictly business sense, that's a risk.
Okay, you've asked the board for permission to operate for 2 more days in March, which would result in some amount of excess emissions as you emit for those 2 days when you might not otherwise be required. Can you describe to the board the amount of emissions you expect from the facility over those 2 days?
Looking at the engineering studies, we're thinking it's about 30 or 40 pounds per day of excess emissions strictly from the fueling using the emissions factors and not counting the additional vehicle miles and whatnot.
So over 2 days of time that you're asking for, something like 80 pounds of VOC or less?
Or less, yeah.
And how did you calculate out this roughly 32-pound number of excess VOCs? How did you come to that number?
Well, an engineer came to that number using the emissions factors.
Do you make certain assumptions about taking your highest throughput day and multiplying that by an average?
Yes, it was conservatively calculated using our busiest day, which is typically a Monday, instead of the actual days of the week that we would that are at subject here, which are midweek, which are a little bit lower.
So as part of variance, we also need to talk about potential mitigation of excess emissions. Can you explain to the board, how does Costco already mitigate its VOC emissions from this facility?
Well, as I mentioned, strict adherence to Rule 461, which is unique to South Coast District, but it involves daily inspections of all the equipment, and also periodic inspections and periodic testing in addition to the continuous monitoring. We also monitor our alarms through a third-party service that automatically dispatches service when something goes wrong. Again, ISD will shut our station down, so it's in everyone's interest for us to jump all over that. So I think our normal operations are excellent and do better even than the state emission factors would indicate, especially through spillage control.
We also need to talk to the board about monitoring of these emissions. So how does Costco propose to monitor emissions? Is that by monitoring your throughput itself?
Yes, because every gallon sold is subject to the same emissions controls.
Okay. And have you had a chance to review, and this might be a good time to give exhibit, it's marked as Exhibit 2 because it's Exhibit 2 to the variance, but actually for this hearing, it will be marked as Exhibit 1. And this is proposed variance conditions. It's identical to Exhibit 2 in the variance petition. And so if I can give this to the clerk.
Mr. McDonough, the copy of the petition that I have has one exhibit, which is the permit to construct and operate.
I'm sorry, yeah, I just noticed that. Thank you for the correction. I'm not sure how the board wants to mark the exhibit. I think we marked it Exhibit 2 since we already had an Exhibit 1 to the petition.
Yes, the exhibit in the petition will be marked as Exhibit 1. The proposed variance conditions distributed by Mr. McDonough will be marked as Exhibit 2.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that the board has a copy of Exhibit 2. Mr. Herlacher, have you had a chance to take a look at the proposed conditions in Exhibit 2?
I have.
And can you confirm that Costco is agreeable to those conditions if the district were amenable?
Yes.
Now, could you also briefly discuss for the board the time frame for the variance coverage you're requesting?
It looks like just the last 2 days of this month, perhaps an hour of Wednesday.
So through to the end of the business day on March 31st, Friday?
Yes.
Okay. So again, to come back to Ms. Feldman's question in terms of whether compliance is within your reasonable control, do you believe that that it should not be within your reasonable control to incur tens of thousands of vehicle miles of excess criterion toxic pollutants in order to save 78 pounds of VOC?
No.
That's all I have for now.
Ms. Feldman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is Costco asking for a variance only through March? Is it just these next few days?
That's what we're currently asking for, yeah.
Okay. You haven't gone over yet, is that my understanding?
No, we have not.
How close are you?
Should be tomorrow.
Are you sure? You might get through tomorrow?
Well, like I said, we don't control the number of people who pull up to our gas station, but our projections are pretty accurate, and we expect late tomorrow evening. But as every day goes by, of course, we can dial that in more precisely.
Sure, I understand. I mean, according to the petition, you thought it could have been today.
Yes, we did feel
So-
it could have been today.
If it's late tomorrow, today's the 27th, is it? Today's the 28th. Tomorrow's the 29th. So you may actually only be in violation for 2 days. Is that feasible? Possible?
Possible. I think it's more likely that we'll hit the target, hit our limit, I should say, probably around dinner time tomorrow.
What are the hours of operation at this facility?
6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m.
Is that 7 days a week?
No, weekends a little bit shorter.
And when is it that you realized that you would probably exceed the March throughput limit?
In the first week of March.
Had you curtailed hours of operation when you first realized that? Do you think it's reasonable to anticipate a reduction in customers that might have kept you under the limit?
It's possible, but we would have felt we were breaking our trust with our members because there was no way to notify them that we wouldn't have been able to maintain our existing hours. And also by that time, we had already submitted our permit application and had every reason to believe that it would be approved prior to the end of March.
I see. When was your first communication with the district during which you became aware that the South Coast had not yet approved the new CARB emission factors?
I don't have the exact date, but it was mid-month, perhaps the 16th or to 20th, in that range.
Okay.
I'm going by memory, though.
I understand. Where's the nearest gas station to Costco's Tustin location? A competitor?
If I understood your correction right, where's the nearest Costco?
No,
The nearest gas station?
nearest gas
Yeah,
station,
there's a Shell and a Mobil each about a mile away.
about a mile. And where's the nearest Costco?
Yeah, Irvine and Fountain Valley, each about 8 miles away.
About 8 miles. Okay. You spoke very highly of your trained employees, and I just want you to know that the district appreciates Costco's efforts in this regard.
Thank you.
As well as your practices at the stations. But you're not suggesting that the competing gas station a mile away holds itself to a lesser standard, are you?
I don't know, I don't shop there.
Right.
I'm proud of us, but I hope everybody's doing a great job. I do know that they charge an extra 20 to 30 cents a gallon.
Okay. And do you know if they're also selling top-tier gasoline at that station?
Shell is, I think Mobil is also now.
Okay. Do you have, you characterize Costco as a destination shop. I'm quite sure that's accurate. But do you have any idea how many of your members come in on a per-day basis just for gasoline? Of the 4,000 who visit the station? do
You mean
have-
how many of them go inside?
Yeah, no, well, either way.
many
It'll
people
work
buy
out either
gas?
way. Of the
Okay, yeah.
4,000, well, of the 4,000 that you say go to the gas station, do you know how many of them came exclusively to the site for gas? They did not shop at Costco that day. They just went to get gas.
Statistically, this varies by location and by market conditions, but statistically, about half of our members that buy gas also go inside the building.
About half, okay.
Is that,
Do you have somebody disagreeing with you?
might have better.
At the Tustin site, 73% of our members buy gas and shop on the same day.
Okay,
Okay, so it's only 25% of the clientele who are there just for gasoline only.
yeah, let me say that on the record. That's,
Yes,
at
please.
this particular location, it's much higher. It's about 73% go into the building as well as buy gas.
Okay. Has Costco ever exceeded this monthly throughput limit to date at this facility?
Yes.
Do you need to call a different witness?
No, let me clarify that. Let me clarify that. This location has exceeded its throughput limit in the past when the limit was lower.
Okay, so the Tustin facility has never exceeded the approximately 1.6 million gallons that is currently on its permit.
Not this limit. Right, yes, we've closed before because, to avoid exceeding a throughput limit.
Okay.
But not this current limit at this location in the past.
Okay. Now, I'm a little confused about your rationale when it comes to an impact on emissions. The CARB emission factors were recalculated based on enhanced vapor recovery systems and ISD and all of that. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And then they did a study to understand the impact that those enhanced systems were having on emissions so that they would come up with an accurate emission factor or more accurate emission factor, right?
yes.
Okay. But you're not, well, I won't say what you're not saying. Let me ask you, what are you saying that using new emission factors results in a reduction of actual emissions?
The emissions are what they are using these systems.
Right.
The emissions factors just captures that benefit. So the emissions have been lower ever since we installed enhanced vapor recovery a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So pumping more gas is going to result in an increase of emissions from the facility, even if the math turns out to be more favorable to you because of a new emission factor. Isn't that fair to say?
Well, those gallons would be pumped anywhere, I think is our point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you say that by sending customers elsewhere to get their gas, and that will result in all these tens of thousands of additional miles traveled, aren't you making an assumption that your customers are going to get gas at a gas station that is not otherwise convenient to them? That they wouldn't also be in that neighborhood for some other reason and get gas?
Well, I would hate to overcharacterize 4,000 individuals making individual decisions on a given day. Healthy respect for individual judgments. However, every one of them would have pulled up to our gas station, found it closed, and had to drive elsewhere. Whether it's to another Costco or another retailer, it would have been additional miles.
Except for the 73% who intended to shop at the store anyway. They were there anyway.
We assume that they would still have to go somewhere else, though, for their
Yes.
fuel.
Yes,
So the additional
obviously.
miles would be driven anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
They would obviously have to go somewhere else for their fuel, but it doesn't mean those are additional miles traveled necessarily. If they're now going to go to a gas station near their dentist, or near some other store that they needed to go to, or near their home.
I don't know 4,000 plus people. We're consistently over 4,000 people per day, and every one of them would be disappointed finding us closed. That's our main concern.
Yeah, I have no doubt that it will be an inconvenience to your customer. I'm not suggesting otherwise. It's just the impact on emissions that had me a little bit confused.
Well, they're hard to quantify, admittedly, yes.
You talked about how, when you were addressing the issue of mitigation, that strict adherence to Rule 461 constitutes the mitigation that you're offering for the variance?
That happens every day, but it would certainly happen on these days as well.
Right, but you're not suggesting that compliance with the rule constitutes mitigation, are you?
Well, it mitigates emissions every day. That's the rule's purpose.
Okay. You talked a little bit, too, about how there really are no available controls to reduce the emissions any further that might enable the district. I assume that what you're suggesting is that if you could reduce your emissions further, the district could, despite any disagreement about the CARB emission factor, issue a higher throughput to you.
We feel that the Tustin location is using state-of-the-art equipment as certified by the Air Resource Board.
Right.
If the Air Resource Board was to certify more robust equipment, theoretically that would be possible, but it's not possible in this time frame.
Right. What about emission offsets? Does Costco currently hold ERCs for VOC in a sufficient quantity to address the 80 or so pounds you would need?
We do.
And have you offered those offsets to the district as a means by which they could increase your throughput now?
We didn't know that that was an option, but we would willingly do so, yes.
I have no further questions at this time for the witness.
Mr. Herlicker, you prepared the petition?
No, Mr. McDonough did.
You signed it?
I did.
Do you believe everything in there is true?
Yes.
I have a number of questions, and unfortunately, they're not in any particular order. They're going to bounce around. You told us that, and I believe it's an assumption on your part, that if your service station is closed, people will drive extra miles to get to a service station. How do you know that they don't already do that to get to your station because of the low cost?
On the presumption that we are a destination shop, and borne out by many years of experience, that's the whole premise of our combining a gas station with a Costco.
But a quarter of your customers at the service station don't enter the building. They just go there for the gas.
Yes, that's because typically people go, they need to refuel more often than they would typically go to a Costco, where we sell in large quantities, and therefore it isn't like a convenience store. It's something they go with a purpose, and so when they go to the warehouse, they also get gas, but then frequently they'll also just go by to get gas because of the great value in the
So
fuel.
maybe those customers that aren't going in the building are already driving extra miles just to get there for the
Undoubtedly true to a certain extent because of the great price that we offer.
Are you familiar with the area, of that particular area where that service station is?
I've been there several times, but I live in Seattle, so pretty familiar.
And you believe this is a low-income area?
No, not necessarily. However, we serve members wherever they are in the LA area, and so
We're
even-
talking about this station.
right. I wouldn't want to characterize their income levels other than we serve everybody who's a member.
Do you know whether there is a service station considerably closer than a mile to your Costco facility?
I think we just looked on Gas Buddy, and obviously we pay attention to the competition to make sure that nobody is lower than us. I think the information I saw on the computer was a mile. Might be slightly different. And I would hazard to add, sir, I don't think either of those gas stations could take even a small fraction of 4,000 people a day.
Why did you believe that the permit would be issued by the end of the month?
We were told that the board had adopted not the CAPCOA approved numbers, but something higher, but still much lower than what they had been using when they calculated our throughput on our existing permit, and that we expected, and we were told that the permit was likely to be issued prior to the end of March.
That was told to you by the district?
Yes.
When?
Again, I would have to go from memory, and I'd have to have the emails in front of me. We were notified by email.
I don't remember if it's in the petition or if it's something that you told us. You mentioned loss of memberships, if it's closed for 2 days.
Well, this is, when we do have to close a gas station in in South Coast because of throughput. And this has happened every now and then in the past, and we've continued to apply additional ERCs to increase our throughput up to the maximum allowed under the ERC program. We've experienced the keen disappointment of our members who drive up short on time, expecting to get the great price that we offer and the quality fuel that we offer, and are turned away. And yes, we feel like we're breaking trust with those members by not being able to provide the value that they become a member for. Now, those considerations may be outweighed by the great rotisserie chickens we have or whatever else they like. Certainly, we have great member loyalty, but whenever we feel like we've broken trust with our members in any way, they expect us to figure this stuff out and be there for them, and we feel that very keenly.
And so those 2 days will outweigh the great price.
I'm sorry, sir.
Never mind, doesn't require an answer. I have no other questions. Ms. Brusite.
Sort of on that line of thinking, you've been aware of the throughput limit in your permit for quite some time, isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in the beginning of March, when you knew that you were projecting greater demand, but you did not know that you would get a new permit modification, I don't understand if shutting down is so harmful to your members and to Costco itself and the trust. Why not put into effect lower hours to make sure you did not have to shut down?
Reasonable question, ma'am. However, we had been told and been paying close attention to the emissions factors discussion and had been told that once CAPCOA ruled on what their opinion was on the new ARB factors, which first was going to happen in December and then eventually stretched out to late January, that once they gave that approval that we would file the new permits, which we did very promptly, and that they would be approved because we were under the impression that CAPCOA was the next hurdle. We didn't anticipate that the district would then question both ARB and CAPCOA. We thought that was the final deal, and so we fully expected our permit application to come through, and we just didn't, we thought that would be the relief.
But the application went in at the end of January, so by the beginning of March, that application had been with the district for quite some time, and you still did not have the permit modification. So it was an assumption on your part, but not based on that you would get the modification in time, but you could have planned, correct? And not relied on a modification that you did not control the timing of.
Well, I totally agree. We do not control the timing of the permit. However, we had reason to believe that we would get the permit in time based on all of our communications with both the district and CAPCOA's, was that the head of CAPCOA that was reassuring us? So we just didn't think it was going to be further delayed, and indeed had been confirmed by the district that it should be approved by the end of March.
On the issue of extra vehicle miles, should you have to close, people don't live at Costco, they live elsewhere, so they would have to travel home, isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, they'd have to drive what?
Once they're at Costco, they need to then go back home. So isn't it just as reasonable they would likely pass another gas station on their way home?
Certainly I'm sure they pass gas stations everywhere. There's lots of gas stations around. However, they're coming to Costco to buy gas because of the great value and the high quality product. So that's what their first choice was, and that's why they're gonna come to Costco first.
Understood. So again, putting aside the factor of are they going to be disappointed, I'm sure they would be. But as far as extra tens of thousands of extra vehicle miles, that I just wanted to have you agree that that's quite speculative because you do not know whether or not these people actually have to drive out of their way.
I absolutely agree that it's speculative. It's based on over 4,000 members each day, and we figured if each one drove 2 miles, but that we have no way of knowing what they're doing other than that they'll be disappointed in Costco.
Okay, fair enough. And then the final thing was, in regard to actual losses that would be felt by Costco, I know you testified about $500,000. In the petition, it's estimated to be $636,000. But those are sales that you're not entitled to make and you would not otherwise make in a month based on your permit restrictions. Isn't that correct? The throughput restriction?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just, looking at page 6 of your petition, down at the bottom, and it says, as discussed above, under answer to item 21, as discussed above, Costco permit application, once approved, will result in an overall decrease in emissions at the Tustin facility. Tell me how that is.
That's incorporating the lower factors, that gas stations don't pollute as much as the factors that were incorporated into our throughput limit.
Isn't this the same issue that Ms. Feldman raised? Whether you use this factor or that factor, the emissions are a function of the emission control. And unless you're changing the emission control, you're not changing the emissions, are you?
No, we estimate, I think we estimated about 70 to 80 pounds in pure refueling emissions based on the emissions factors using the state-of-the-art equipment approved by the Air Resource Board. We're not allowed to add equipment that's not certified.
Okay. Before the permit is changed, you're operating it perfectly, maintaining it perfectly, but there are some emissions. Okay. You change the emission factor. That doesn't change the emissions, does it?
No, the emissions are what they are.
Okay. And then you increase the throughput. Emissions are increased, are they not?
That's true of every gallon sold in LA.
So the statement at the bottom of page 6 is not correct. Is that correct? Is that true?
Can I see it again? I don't have the petition. We gave our only copy away. I'm sorry, I have to. Thanks for that moment to review that. However the wording comes across, it's based on the idea that our emissions are lower than the permit condition as it exists because of the lower factors. That was the intent. That gas stations pollute less than what was reflected in our existing throughput limit, and therefore we had applied for a new permit using the new factors, which are lower, meaning gas stations pollute less than anticipated. Or less because of EVR is more specific.
It's kind of like a rose by any other name.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your proposed variance conditions. Condition number 1 says, during the variance period, petitioner shall maintain full use and shall not bypass the phase 1, phase 2 enhanced vapor recovery controls and/or in-station diagnostics at the Tustin gasoline dispensing facility. Aren't you supposed to do that anyway?
Yes. The point just being that there would be no change in what we do every single day to control emissions, that we would continue to do those.
Hey, thank you. Ms. Byrd?
Mr. Chair, could I have 5 minutes, please?
You can have 15. We're taking a break.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Actually not just the fact
We're back on the record. Board members, any further questions? Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to clear up some dates in my mind. I'm looking at your current permit, which is Exhibit 1, and that was issued in November 2016, correct? Do you see?
Yes.
Okay, and when was it that you mentioned you knew that there would be new CARB factors?
The results were published in December 2013.
But when did you know that they were even developing new factors?
I was aware personally in 2009 when I agreed to let CARB put monitoring equipment at our Cal Expo station in Sacramento.
Okay, so you knew then. Has this,
Ma'am, I'm sorry. I knew they were
That they would
studying
be.
it at that
Okay.
time, and so I was waiting for the report.
okay, has this particular location ever come close to its limit of 1,640,000 gallons?
Not that limit. This is the first time we've hit that limit.
No, I mean, has it ever come even close to that?
No, it's at an all-time high at this location.
Okay, so in the 4 years of the permit prior to this, it never came anywhere near the 1.64?
Growing steadily nearer, but it has not exceeded it.
Okay, so it was rolling steadily nearer? I'm not sure what that means. Over
Well,
time, it was getting closer and closer? Is that what that means?
Yes, but then fairly recently, as prices rose again, the growth rates accelerated, so
Okay,
it became much more urgent fairly recently.
okay, and it wasn't until, okay, so in 2009, when you kind of knew that this study was taking place, there was nowhere near this limit. Was the previous permit this limit, the same limit?
No, it was lower.
And what was it then, approximately? This ballpark is fine.
And maybe we need another witness.
Just
If
ballpark
you
is
don't
fine.
know.
Put them on when you're done with this witness?
I think it's 1.4 million,
Okay.
ma'am. I hate to rely on my memory
Yeah,
too much.
It's okay. I was just thinking ballpark, incrementally, you were saying things were rising, and I was just trying to see where it was going from there. So, okay. I think that might be, just one second. And when you obtained this new limit in your permit, what was it based on? I mean, how was that? You were previously about 1.4 million, now you're at 1.6 million.
That is the maximum, well, the district informed us that's the maximum allowed under the ERC program without going to a federal major polluter permit.
Okay, so that's why when you applied for that as a limit because it was the maximum allowed for your ERC program.
I don't recall exactly what we applied for in the last instance, but that's what we got.
Okay. You wouldn't have applied for more than that, right? I mean, that would have required a lot more.
Well, we were told that that was the maximum
Okay,
that
okay.
we could get under the existing program.
Okay. Thank you.
Doctor?
Can you tell, you're saying that the, year by year, the amount of gas you're pumping is going up, is that correct?
Yes.
What is the maximum, I mean, you guys get daily totals. What was the biggest day that you had in March? How much was that? How many gallons did you pump?
I have that. It was over 60,000 gallons. Do you want
One
the exact
day.
number? Yeah, in one day.
Okay. Because your average is about, I just did a little math here, and it's about 55,000 per day. So basically, it's in your variance, you haven't mentioned, somebody pointed out to me that mentioned how much you want for these 2 days. What would be the maximum you're asking for? You're giving us an unlimited, you're asking us to just carte blanche. So I don't understand that. Why didn't you give me ask for the worst day scenario times 2, or the average per day times 2?
Well, we wanted to be conservative in our estimate of what the emissions might be, so we used our busiest day, even though the 2 days that we're asking not to be closed are not the busiest day, Mondays and Fridays being the busiest typically, but Mondays particularly. So we used a Monday day to calculate the potential emissions under the factors, and that's how we reached the 78 pounds or whatever we estimated. Yeah.
Less than 80, okay. The other question I have for you is a little bit more geographic and sort of demographic. My experience in Los Angeles is that the Costco's that I've been to are in low-density areas, so that the surrounding community could be upscale, could be middle class, whatever. There aren't a lot of people there. A lot of people are traveling to go to Costco, and I certainly would, and people in my neighborhood, it's about 15 miles to your place, and they go. The point is that if this variance falls through and you're now limited, you're saying that 23% who only go for gas are gonna have to, are gonna be out of it because you're gonna say they're gonna have to pay more. But you gotta also appreciate the fact that everybody has a gas station within blocks of their neighborhood, unless they're in a very rural community, or live out by a highway or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that that's a rather valid argument on both accounts. It's easy to get gas. It's harder to get cheaper gas because of the proximity of so many gas stations here. And my other comment about the max. By the way, Mondays and Fridays are your busiest days. Was that maximum day that you pumped was a Monday or Friday, or was it some other day just by happenstance? Do you recall?
I have the numbers. I can read them to the maximum day of the month, or what we sold yesterday, which was a Monday, which was over 60,000 gallons.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Okay, so the 60,000 really applies. So that's what you use in the calculation.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Senator?
I have some concern about the request that you're making and whether or not you're able to justify the need at this particular time to save 2 days. My question therefore is, have you done a study to determine what radius do most of your members live with of the Costco store that's in question?
Yeah, yes, sir. We have a pretty good idea based on zip codes of who's shopping where. In Los Angeles, though, that becomes very fuzzy because people are commuting long distances and there's no, well, I shouldn't say no association, but it's not, we can't just assume like we might in Omaha, Nebraska, that everyone in Omaha is going to the Omaha Costco. They could go to any number of Costco's. We have them within 10 miles of each other frequently throughout the LA area, so it becomes pretty fuzzy.
So just addressing the population density for the members who go there just for gasoline, no way you can justify that. Guessing at it.
Well, it's a fair point, sir. It is an estimate, as I mentioned, in that since we have no way to communicate and this applies to Dr. Lerner's comment too, there's no way to communicate to all our members in LA that we're going to be closed in these 2 days. We have to assume that they're coming and that disappointed, they would then go elsewhere. And that's, admittedly, it's an estimate.
What's your operation hours at the pumping gas?
Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. to 9:30, and we open about an hour later and close an hour earlier on the
Monday through
weekends.
Friday? What about on Sunday?
Sunday, it's 7 to 7.
At every store?
We have some small regional variations, but that's pretty common.
Well, it seemed to me that you claiming this to be an urgency based on the statewide service station emission factors. You want to be included, you want to benefit from that study that's been approved in January. That's what it seemed like to me. And that I got to ask you another question. You keep a report that you, to the district, annual report of the amount of gasoline used. So what's the maximum? I have it here, but you can tell what your maximum has been that you reported to the district?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, sir, but we are required to report for all our gas stations the monthly throughput and then the annual total each year to the district.
Well, is 17,680,000 out of the question?
No, not at all.
Okay, have you ever exceeded that number per year, annual?
We've never exceeded our throughput limits, and this addresses a comment that I may have answered a little unclearly. We shut down if we hit those limits. We don't exceed them or violate our limit.
What happened to your customers? Did they lose faith with you when you shut down?
We feel yes, and
They don't
hence
come
our
back for a
concern.
while? What period of time did you shut down? And what month? If you're approaching 19,680,000 annual max, you shut down in November?
No, we haven't reached that limit yet. That's the highest possible limit under the existing program. And Tustin, this month, is the first instance that we're going to be approaching that limit. The other times we hit our limit and had to close, we were subject to lower limits, either at that station or at other stations in the district.
Now, you're not approaching the annual limit because that's not before us.
No.
You're approaching the monthly.
That's exactly right, sir. On a monthly prorated basis,
you
that's
said.
how I interpreted your question. I'm sorry.
Monthly increase. To date, how much have you pumped gas that you've pumped at these stations so far?
I have those numbers. You have your fingertip? Yeah, there you go. Our latest numbers through yesterday, 1,536,460 gallons month to date.
1 million, say it again?
1,536,460 gallons.
So you got about another 90,000 to go?
Yeah, about 2.5 days.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Apparently not. Mr. McDonough, any other witnesses?
Not other witnesses, but redirect for this witness.
You may.
Okay. So, Mr. Herlocker, I want to clear up a couple of questions that were raised by the prosecutor and the board. There may be some confusion about the reductions that Costco is claiming as part of the variance. Is Costco arguing that the only emissions reductions from granting this variance are due to use of revised emissions factors?
No.
And what is the primary driver of the reduction in emissions by granting the variance versus denying it?
The excess trips for whatever they end up being. They're hard to quantify, but we know they exist.
So you heard questions about, well, maybe some of these customers have a gas station in that perfect situation. It's precisely on their way home and they incur 0 extra miles getting gas. You remember that question?
Yes.
Is there any way to know exactly how many of these 4,000 plus members have that perfect situation of having to drive 0 extra miles to get gas?
No way of knowing that for sure.
Okay. It's probably not all 4,000 of them, right? Or 4,500 or whatever it is?
Doubtful, certainly.
But it's probably not 0, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So is it some significant number of people?
Yes.
Okay.
And our assumption in doing that and writing the petition as it was, because that's an important point, sir, is that those extra trip emissions would be greater than the less than 80 pounds of excess emissions through operations. So that was why we characterized it in that way. And I still think that's a fair assessment, even though one number has a quantification ability, and the trips, 4,000 people driving elsewhere, certainly it's an estimate, but we don't have as precise a number on that estimate, other than our expectations it's greater than 80 pounds.
So it's some significant number, but undetermined number of trips.
Yes.
You also heard the doctor ask you or make a comment that for many people, gas stations may be within blocks of where they live. Remember that question?
Yes.
Would these blocks still potentially be extra miles when you're talking about thousands of cars?
Yes, because they've already come to Costco hoping to get gas and will have to go elsewhere. If they knew in advance that we weren't open, yeah, they would find the most convenient place, and that would probably reduce the extra miles. But there's just no way to communicate with them at this late date that we're going to be closed.
Okay, so then let's talk about the emission factor, because I want you to be clear about what the use of the emission factor is in the relation to the permit. So correct me if I'm wrong, the facility has a maximum allowable emission that's based on gasoline throughput gallons times a factor, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and this multiplication of a factor times gallons produces some maximum mass emissions for the facility, is that right?
Yes.
And that's somewhere south of Title V levels, right?
Yes.
Okay. In applying for a permit that also applies a lower factor, are you also accepting a lower overall mass emission limit that would be even lower than what the Title V limit would allow you to have?
Yes, in the extent that we don't hit our limit at every period, if that's what you're asking.
So so again, you heard the question, emissions are emissions, miles are miles, but throughput is throughput too. So if we apply the same factors pre-permit and post-permit, getting the new permit, would you expect that there would be a lower maximum mass emission limit after you get the new permit than in the existing permit?
Yes, because the factors would be lower.
Okay. I also want to ask a few questions to follow up on a question that Ms. Bird asked about your rolling closer to this limit that you have in your permit right now. Is that why Costco wanted to revise its permit as early as last year?
Yes.
If you had, so you got a question about potentially reducing hours. Remember that question? Could you reduce hours in order to make your limit for March?
No longer. It's too late in the month now to appreciably make up the difference that we expect.
And if you had done as was suggested, and let's say Costco did decide to reduce its hours early in March, would that still have resulted in the very same effect of people not being able to get gas and having to go elsewhere?
Yes, unless we could have known far enough in advance to communicate the dates that we were not going to be open on our posted hours.
Okay, I think that's all for now, but we'll follow up if there's further questions.
The date you were informed by the district?
Yeah, there's one more follow-up. The date that we were informed by the district with respect to the permit not being ready by March, you've gotten some further information on that?
Well, during the break, we determined that was March 11th, so fairly early in the month. that we were told that the permit was going to be done by the end of the month. And therefore, we didn't think we had to take mitigating action prior to now.
Okay, that's all for now.
Mr.
Your
Chair.
testimony has raised
If I
more questions. Ms. Feldman, and then the board is going to have some more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused because I know that Ms. Prusak referred to your submission of the permit application in January. When did you submit the application to have the throughput increased?
As soon as possible after CAPCOA had accepted the CARB factors.
Do you know what the date is? Does your other witness know what the date is?
I'm thinking February 20th, ma'am, but we can try to find that exact date.
That's okay, we have it, don't we? Do we? Sure, okay.
Was I close? Okay.
No, it was in fact later. Your sales at this facility and the number of customers that are coming through and the increase in those numbers have nothing to do with whether or not CARB changed its emission factor. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah, it's more to do with the price and the quality.
Right. So it is likely that in this month, you would have exceeded your throughput whether or not emission factor amendment was on the table. Isn't that right?
I'm sorry, ma'am, could you repeat that? I'm
Well,
not sure I followed.
Right now, the emission factors that CARB is adopting and that the district is evaluating have become an issue in this case. It enabled you to apply for an increase in throughput on your permit, and you felt you had a good basis to do that. But whether or not that ever happened, isn't it likely that you would have sold the same amount of gas in March of 2017 at the Tustin facility?
Subject to our throughput limit, of course.
Right. So is it your testimony that you would have shut down rather than violate that throughput limit?
It is indeed, and that's been our past behavior.
Right. So whether or not you had a permit application pending, there was a scenario under which you would have felt you had to shut down that station rather than violate your permit condition.
That's right, that's why we're here.
And I thank you for that, too, for your diligence in complying with the regulations. Now, you also testified that the primary driver of the emission reductions you see resulting from this variance are, in fact, the excess trips. And you did concede that there's no way to know the excess miles associated with those trips. But you do feel justified in assuming that they are significant. On what are you basing that conclusion?
The number of transactions per day, which is known, and the fact that each of them is going to have to drive some distance. And so how far, as there's no way to know.
Okay.
But we have to assume that at least to the nearest gas station or to the nearest Costco, therefore a significant number.
And you're also assuming that but for the fact that the Costco station was closed, they would not have traveled that route or those miles for any other reason. That's a basic part of your assumption, isn't it?
Well, some of them, but when people set out for Costco, they know we offer both gas and merchandise, and therefore we don't know what motivates an individual on a given day, other than there's tons of them come and they buy gas, so.
Can't argue with that. Okay, I have no further questions.
I just had one question. With regard to your statement that under the permit modification that you're seeking, there would be decreased emissions overall, you're asking for a throughput increase, aren't you, as that modification?
Yes, we're asking for a throughput increase because the total emissions are now recognized as being less than our existing permit.
Not the total emissions, the emissions per gallon, those emission factors, at least as far as CARB and CAPCOA, but not yet the district, have been determined to be lower. Is that correct?
Yes, the
Okay, but-
lower factors, right.
And then you testified earlier that throughput in your permit is a factor of emission limits, of those emission factors, I should say. So aren't you, I don't know, I don't see your modification application, but aren't you, or are you, requesting a throughput increase so that overall emissions are going to stay the same because you're accounting for these lower factors with the increased throughput?
That's a great question, ma'am. But no, we think our emissions will be lower because we will not sell what would, the maximum amount that would be allowed under the new emissions factors.
Okay, maybe not right away, but you're going to be allowed to do that under your permit. So the cap's going to be the cap.
Well, the proposed new limit under our permit application that's currently in front of the district was going to be substantially lower than the maximum that would have been allowed had the CARB standards been adopted in the district as they were approved by CAPCOA. So it's already below that limit.
Okay, well, that's all speculative to us too, because we don't have that. But you're not asking, my final question is, you're not asking us to impose any limits on March. So theoretically, you could pump as much as you wanted. You're not asking for any limitation on that at all.
We're open to whatever remedy, including application of ERCs. We can estimate how much extra gallons we need this month. We assume that with our permit application already pending and with success in hand on getting a higher limit, that we just didn't make that request, but we certainly could. Like if we knew that we could sell an additional 60,000 gallons per day, we would accept that. That would be great.
Okay, we haven't proposed that, as a, but you accept it.
No, we
Should
haven't been asked, but we would willingly.
Okay, thank you.
When did you make your application for the permit? What day was that again?
I didn't know that by memory, but I think we have that, if you can give us a second. In fact, Randy, do you have that in front of you? I mean, we apply to Randy. So, I do.
Yeah, I don't want to call a witness just for that. Our records indicate that the package was sent to the district on February 16th and entered into our system on March 10th.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
And are you familiar with the Culver City store?
Yes, sir, I've been there.
Is that the most popular store in the area, in the basin?
No, it's a popular one, though.
Okay. You stated earlier that, verified by your partner in the back, that a certain percentage of customers who go there for gas also go to the store. Is that correct? What percentage is that again?
Well, it varies by location and by time of year and a thousand things. So Christmas would be different than
I understand
another
all
time.
that now, come on.
Yeah. So,
We're not talking about Christmas, we're talking about March.
right. I'm sorry, sir, I might not have understood your question.
What percentage of the, I want you to reiterate what you stated earlier, the number of customers who go to buy gas, a large percentage of them go to the store shopping.
Right, and Tustin is high in that regard. It's 70% of the people who go to the warehouse also buy gas, or they buy gas and also go to the warehouse.
And that's 4,000 people per day, roughly.
We sell over 4,000 transactions of gasoline at Tustin per day.
And then 70% of those people also shop.
Yes.
And they buy bulk rate. They buy big boxes of everything. You can't buy one box of Kleenex. You got to buy a whole stack of them. doesn't.
It's a volume deal. Yes, that is part of our
So
philosophy.
it's reasonable to say then that if you're going to go and buy gas, you're going to go do bulk rate. How often are you going to do bulk rate purchase at the store?
That'll vary by every member, sir. It's a good question. I know the thing that I go in for when I go to buy gas is for a chicken. So it isn't bulk, it's eaten very quickly. And I don't mean to make light of your question, it's a good one. We don't know why people are coming. It might be to pick up their prescription, or it might be to buy the big screen TV and load a shopping cart. We just don't know on any particular instance what that's going to be, other than we know our percentages.
This shopping pattern is the thing that perks my interest. And I'll tell you why. You talked about your personal experience, and I can tell you about mine. When I go buy gasoline there, I'm not going in there to buy bulk rate every trip, and I make about three trips at most to buy gas per week. I go into the store twice a month. So I don't understand that population that you serve to buy gas, and at the same time you're saying a higher percentage of them are also shopping there. So, I mean, those numbers don't register in my mind, unfortunately for you.
Well, I can offer just speculation, sir. It's a great question. But as you know, the members that have large families, they're coming and buying a ton of stuff on a regular basis. But also a big part of Costco wholesale is selling to small businesses who buy huge quantities of merchandise on a very regular basis. So again, it's each individual finding their value and deciding whether a membership is worthwhile to them. And I can tell you that there are a great number of members, and some of this is anecdotal, what they tell us, that the gas savings alone justify the membership, and even though they may not need, the huge box of Kleenexes, the gas savings alone, it usually exceeds the membership charge that we ask them of.
Now, do you have an order and delivery program at this site, as you do in Culver City?
That's a growing business for us. We call that business delivery, our business centers, and we're experimenting with that. It's not consistent across the company yet, though.
So nobody's driving there, they just call in for the order and it's delivered to them.
Yeah, we do not have that service broadly available. We're experimenting with that as the market changes with e-commerce and whatnot, but that is not a feature of Costco yet. It's just something we're testing.
It's been testing it for over a year and a half or so.
Well, we've had business delivery where we have big trucks going to small businesses to unload groceries or whatever things they're buying. That's been around for a long time. But as far as delivering items to individual members at their homes, that's at the very infancy, because typically we've been a cash and carry business.
So when that happens, the customers don't have to drive to Costco's and buy their grocery and get gas and drive back home, is that right?
Right, the delivery truck would be buying the gas and spending the...
What percentages of that business is taking place now at Costco's Culver City or wherever you are?
Tiny fraction is delivered. It's still a cash and carry business. Members come and take their stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Apparently no further questions for the witness, Mr. Herlocker. Any other witnesses for the Costco?
No, unless the board has any other questions.
I don't think so. Ms. Feldman?
I'm not inclined to call anybody from engineering. I know that I have heard enough upon which to base a conclusion regarding beyond reasonable control. And I don't think it's necessary to get into the weeds on the CARB emission factors and all of that. If, however, the board does have questions about that, or we can satisfy your curiosity, or you want to zero in more about the permit itself and the application, I do have a representative from district engineering who can address that.
The CARB emission factors and the CAPCO approval are very interesting, but I think we'll save that, at least I prefer to save that discussion for another time.
Thank you.
Board members, any desire for any testimony from the district? If not, okay. Is there any member of the public who wishes to testify in this matter? I see none. Mr. McDonough, you may make a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll begin by trying to clarify, I think, a few points that I'm not sure got through in Mr. Herlocker's testimony, and one is very important, and I want to make sure this is emphasized, that the emissions reductions that Costco is talking about in granting this variance have really nothing to do with the carbon emission factors, the 2013 emissions factors. They're two different issues. The emission savings that are proposed under this variance have everything to do with the reduction of trips. Now, it's true, and you heard in testimony and questions, that we don't know exactly how many cars would have this perfect situation of, you know, having the gas station right on their way home, and so they incur 0 extra miles in getting that gas. But we know it's not all 4,500 of them. We don't have to speculate. We know it's not all 4,500 of them, and we know reasonably it's not 0. It's probably some significant number in the middle. We're not going to know, and we probably have no way of knowing exactly what number that is. But what you heard in the testimonies, we are confident that granting this variance will save emissions versus the 78 pounds of VOC that would result from even using the maximum throughput for the 2 days we're talking about. I want to make sure that we don't pretend that because the number itself is speculative that somehow we have to suspend our disbelief that there aren't more trips if people have to go elsewhere for gas than if they can just go to Costco. Nobody can sit here and tell you what that number is, but we're confident that it's more than a significant amount, and we don't have to pretend that we don't know that fact. We're obviously never going to know the number. The other point I think that's important to make is that Costco acted in the way that they believed was proactive in this case. They have wanted to revise their permit for over a year. They've worked closely with CAPCO and the district on these factors. They were told on a couple of occasions these factors would be ready at CAPCO in December. They weren't ready until January. We filed the petition. We filed our permit application soon after that. They were then told that the permit application was going to be processed and that the permit would be granted. And it was only in the last 3 weeks or so, or 2 weeks or so, that they were told, well, that's not really going to happen. And so we moved expeditiously to come to this board and seek a variance. Costco is compliance-oriented. They didn't want to have to shut down. They didn't want to have to send their customers to other facilities. And they are very confident that despite not knowing the number, there will be excess emissions, excess toxics in this basin if this variance is denied and they have to shut down. But you heard in testimony they will shut down if they have to. This board can certainly deny the variance and they can shut down. And we believe strongly that will result in extra toxics and extra emissions to the basin, more so than the 78 pounds of VOC that they're proposing. Now, you also heard the witness say that they would be willing to give over VOC ERCs to offset all 78 pounds of VOC. So now we have the possibility of granting a variance and offsetting every pound of VOC that they would create with 2 days of opening. So now we've gotten the number to 0. And again, we're quite confident that without knowing the number, diverting people to other places, other gas stations to refuel elsewhere will result in more than 0 extra emissions and more than 0 extra toxics to this basin. So we're quite confident that granting this variance is a way to save emissions for this district than denying it for what amounts to 2 extra days of operation. And finally, in terms of their proactivity in seeking a permit revision, one point that I think, again, sort of got confused is they are accepting a lower overall mass emission result in their new permit. In other words, it's not just the application of a lower factor. That certainly results in a lower number on paper, but they're also accepting a lower overall mass emission limit than they might otherwise be able to get if they went to the limit of Title V. So we are confident in saying that after this new permit is issued, the total mass emissions that would be allowed under their max throughput will be lower, not just because of the factor, but because of the fact that they will actually accept a lower mass emission limit than what they have currently if you multiply the factors times their throughput. So another way to say that is they're not accepting the maximum throughput they could accept under the new factors and still stay within Title V. So want to make sure there's no confusion about that point. The final point I'll just make is, again, I think the points have been made that this is beyond their reasonable control. Certainly, it's within their control to close, and if this variance is denied, that's exactly what they'll do. But it's not reasonable, we submit, for this board to require them to close. When doing so, we believe would create additional toxics, additional emissions, when the opportunity is here to allow them to operate, to give over VOCs, 7 to 8 pounds of VOCs, and essentially make this a zero excess emission variance. So we believe that the other findings can be made here as well. There is obviously no corresponding benefit to forcing them to close, and indeed we think there's an increase in emissions. And they have considered curtailing operation, but again, even if they had reduced hours, those are still sending members to other facilities, other gas stations to refuel. It doesn't solve the fundamental problem of creating extra vehicle trips and vehicle miles. And finally, you know, you have heard from testimony they already adopt Phase 1, Phase 2, and ISD, which significantly reduces emissions, but even on top of that, they would be willing to consider a condition where they would offer up VOC ERCs in order to further mitigate what they're proposing in this variance. So I think with all of those points, the findings can be made. I just want to make sure that the board understands this is not all about a lower emission factor, and it is about additional trips that, while it's very hard or impossible for us to know the exact number, we know it's more than zero. We think granting the variance will save emissions for the district. Thank you.
Ms. Feldman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a lot. The only part I found confusing was the part about the Title V and the coming up to the maximum. I just didn't follow it, I'm sorry. So I hope at least one or more of you did. But that part made no sense to me. The district is opposed to the granting of the variance as requested. I do have one slight caveat to that, which I'll get to in just a moment. Mr. McDonough is quite correct in his characterization that this is not a matter of whether it's beyond the control of Costco to comply with the permit condition. Clearly they can. They can do it by shutting down for the 2 days this month that it will take to keep them under that limit. They've done it before. We have it clearly stated on the record that they will do it again. And in the past, when they've had to shut down rather than violate a permit condition, they clearly weathered the storm. Costco is a thriving enterprise, and I dare say that while it might disappoint some of their customers to show up at the station and find them closed, they're not going to relinquish their memberships because of it. And they will be back. So, when determining whether something is beyond the reasonable control of the facility, it's perfectly legitimate to consider several factors. And emission savings, I would submit, are one of those factors. In this case, however, unfortunately, the emission savings associated with the granting of a variance are completely speculative. We have a very confident and definite assertion by counsel and the witness that it's not zero, that it's something significant. I don't know how you get to significant. I might be willing to concede that it's not zero. Surely there are 1 or 2 people out of the 4,000 who are going to show up, find the station closed, and actually drive extra miles to get to another gas station, or would not have gone to the Costco site for any other reason but for the gas on that day. And so we could maybe consider those to be the extra miles. There's absolutely no way to quantify what that is. And while it may be less than zero, it may be only a little bit less than zero. So I'm having a problem there. Another basis is the financial harm that would be suffered by the petitioner through the denial of the variance. In this case, that's really a non-issue. Their witness conceded that it's not the financial harm. It's a lot of money. It's about $500,000 a day to any other enterprise that could be significant. But to Costco, clearly, unfortunately for them, it is not. So that's not really a basis for consideration. So here's my caveat. I understand they don't want to shut down. I understand that they believe with great certainty that that's going to have some sort of negative impact on customer relationship, the confidence their members have in their availability. While I don't believe that it is even perhaps beyond reasonable control to shut down, their offer of ERCs to mitigate the emissions down to what could be less than zero is certainly tempting. But we haven't explored that during the conduct of this case. And I want Costco to be completely aware that if they offer up ERCs, let's say 80 pounds to cover the 2 days that they're shut down, that is a permanent relinquishment of 80 pounds of VOC ERCs. This is not a rental, a borrowing. We do it for prorated and get it back. This is, you give up 80 pounds of ERCs. I think that would probably more than offset any excess emissions associated with the variance, and so would leave it to the discretion of the hearing board to decide whether they think that enables them to make a finding of beyond reasonable control, because the closing would then become unreasonable given the benefit to the environment in staying open for the 2 days. That's the only way I think you could do it. I can see by the expression on Ms. Prusak's face that she's not sold. And that's okay, I don't have a poker face either, so don't fret. But I think that when we're gauging what is reasonable, if there is a benefit to the environment through the granting of the variance, even though it's not beyond the absolute control of the petitioner, that's something that you can factor in. I'm not entirely comfortable with it myself. What gives me grave concern is that despite the representation in the petition that they will be back in compliance on April 1st, I don't know what gas sales are going to do in April. I know the district is not that close to coming to terms on the emission factors associated with service stations. I don't know how long it's going to take to process the permit application. We could be back here again at the end of April, May, June. I'm not sure. So all I could say is at this point, the district thinks it's best practice to deny the variance for failure to meet the beyond reasonable control finding, and to represent to petitioner that we will continue to work with you to come up with a better solution going forward, especially if we can't process your permit application in the near term.
Petitioner has asked us to swallow some very difficult to believe assertions. Loss of membership and future patronage for shutting down 2 days. Tens of thousands of additional mile trips. They acknowledge that maybe it's not quantifiable, but we can quantify the excess emissions for the added throughput. And maybe Costco, by being there, increases emissions by attracting customers, that 23% that don't go in the building, and maybe some others, by attracting customers that travel longer distances just to get that lower price. Petitioner continued to assert that that there would be an increase in emissions if they close, and continued to state that there would be a decrease once the permit is issued. Anybody else have some comments? Ms. Brusack?
I didn't mean to make a face, but I was reading the factor number 2 and just really trying to understand the argument, because I have been having a very difficult time finding beyond reasonable control, and I, at this point, cannot make that finding. And just as a reminder, we cannot leverage one versus the other. So we can't look at a variance and look at the 6 findings and say, well, this is a situation where we would really make a lot of savings in environmental pollutants, but we can't make some of the other findings, but that really outweighs it. We can't do that. We are required to make all 6 of the findings and to make them independently. And when it comes to beyond reasonable control finding, and that any harm or any taking a property or closing of this business for this dispensing facility for 2 days, whether that's beyond the reasonable control or the conditions that led to it are beyond the reasonable control, I have to go back to the fact that this petition was filed in early March. There was plenty of time at that point for a petitioner to choose to curtail its hours, to not go over its permitted limits. It is not dictated solely by demand. Demand, of course, they want to meet demand, but they are restricted. They know that. Petitioner has had this permit with this limit for a long period of time. Petitioner has known that there's been uncertainty in when it could apply. We learned that it did not apply until sometime in February. But by March, even in the petition itself, on page 3, in regard to condition 27 and the explanation for why they need a variance, they stated, Costco has no control over whether the district will issue the revised permit. And so, as of March 9th, they knew that there was a large potential. That's why this variance was filed on March 9th. So at that point, knowing that, and knowing that it was such a hardship on its members, and they might lose trust if they closed down, I don't see that it was completely within their control to curtail those hours to make sure that those benefits, that the throughput limit was reached, and to avoid that closure. So I cannot make that beyond reasonable control. I also wouldn't be able to find that consideration was given to curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance. I believe that on March 9th, a decision was made, perhaps earlier because this application had to be filled out, that they wanted to seek an increase in the throughput and through a variance in lieu of actually curtailing their operations. So I think I couldn't make that finding either.
Ms. Bird?
I can't make the finding. And as I sit here, I keep turning around all of the arguments to see if there's any possible way. But I can't. I stop right at the first part of that sentence when it says due to conditions beyond the reasonable control that the petitioner that these things will result. And I don't believe that it's beyond the reasonable control of the petitioner to not violate their permit. As Ms. Prusak stated, they knew there were options. The options on the table when they expected that they would violate their condition were to get a variance and hope that the board would give them a variance, and to possibly curtail, shut down. Hard to project, I admit, and that's the part that kind of bugs me. It's hard to project when you would have had to shut down, but it would have been necessary to shut down at some point. And I think that I didn't know if I needed to disclose that I'm a Costco member, but I don't think I make enough for the year to have to disclose that. But I think that even if you went to a Costco or any other facility and they had a sign posted that for the week of XYZ they would be closed or whatever, that would give notice to those people who are regular customers, who it appears that that's what you're talking about, the consistent customers would be turned away. I think that was enough notice. And I also, I realize that the argument is that not knowing when the permit would be issued, but that part of the argument, I was really puzzled because I don't think there's any way in the world that the district would get an application for a permit and have it back within, 30 days, 45 days. I mean, it's just really hard. So I tried to follow that argument, and I keep thinking, is there something I'm missing there? But I cannot make finding number 2, that is beyond the reasonable control of the petitioner, to be in violation.
Anyone else? Senator?
Mr. Chairman and members, I didn't hear the petitioner state at any time that they ever exceeded the limit for March since they've been operating at that site. And I didn't hear them state that they're going to exceed the annual limit, 19 million plus, previously or even at this particular time. So they're on schedule to operate within those limits, or state otherwise why they have not done it to date, which they did not do, Mr. Chairman and members. So that being the case, much as I look at Costco's, I can't concur in that decision request.
Ms. Prusak?
I think that the evidence that was presented by Costco was that as of yesterday, they were quite close to the limit in any one calendar month, and that based on their projections, based upon how many they get per day, that they will go over this month if they do not shut down.
But they haven't done, over the years, they have not done that. They started guessing at this in the first part of March. In the first part of March, they're saying, hey, we're going to exceed our limit this March, even though we've never exceeded our limit in previous March days. I don't know about that. It's a spontaneous request, I would consider it to be, based on other circumstances. Not really real, but it makes a good argument. That's all I can tell you.
Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to follow up with the senator. I think testimony was also that they have been incrementally even increasing, and this is not, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but incrementally increasing their sales, and it just makes me think that somewhere along the line there should have been some way of projecting that they would reach a point anyway that they might exceed if they have been increasing over time. I'm sure, I'm not one of those people, but they have people who sit there and figure these things out numerically to determine when they're going to increase. And while in this particular month, based on the sales that they had for each day up until that time, that's how they were projecting it. I guess what I'm saying is, and maybe I'm not saying it very clearly, is that even part of my feeling that this was not beyond a reasonable control was that they are incrementally increasing sales. And somehow there should be some formula that tells them when they might reach a point where the permit that they have is not going to be adequate. The permit they have was issued in November 2016. And it's not adequate, and I would think that incrementally, if sales have been increasing, that they would have even been able to project that they would reach this point as well.
What was the sales limit prior to this permit being approved?
The throughput was about 1.4 million per month, and now the new permit,
1.4?
and the old permit, that's what the testimony was about 1.4 million per month, and then this new permit is at 1.64.
So they gave them an increase based on what the incremental
Based on what they
they
applied for.
applied for.
Right. Not, that, I would have, like you, I would have thought that perhaps they would have figured that they should have applied for more. But they had a reason for that too. He did give a reason for that, but that really doesn't matter. They didn't apply for and they don't have, and this is what their permit limit is based on their own application.
I do have a comment with respect to petitioner believing that the permit would be issued before the end of the month. There's no guarantee ever until it's in hand. Secondly, I'm not sure that that's an accurate statement. The repeated, difficult to believe, unfounded assertions that appear in the petition and that were restated in testimony kind of stretches the credibility. So I don't know that they were told that they were going to get the permit at the end of the month. Ms. Prusek?
I also go back to what, I don't know if it was in questions or in closing. I think it was in questions, what Ms. Feldman was asking. I think it was in questions. Costco has had projections that they are going to be going over this throughput, and that was the testimony for some time. They also testified that they are at the limit in their current permit of what they can possibly have as a throughput under their ERC program. So even if you took off the table any request to increase, currently, and that has not been decided by the district. So what they're asking us to say is it's beyond their reasonable control that their demand is going over what they're allowed to have in their permit. And I cannot make that kind of a finding. I don't think this is a proper request, beside the fact that I cannot find it was beyond their reasonable control. I think it is within their reasonable control to comply with their current permit limits, regardless of what their projections are. They need to curtail, and they need to wait out the decision by the district, and for us to be asked to essentially grant them that permit because I think that there is an intention to come back every month for which they go over until that permit is granted or not granted. I don't think that that's a proper request regardless.
I'll entertain a motion. Ms. Bird?
In the matter of Costco case number 5055-8, I move that we deny this request for a short variance due to the inability to find that this was beyond the reasonable control of petitioner to violate their permit.
I'll second the motion. Discussion on the motion. Doctor, how do you vote?
I vote for the motion.
Ms. Prusat?
Yes.
Senator? Motion passes 5-0. The petition is denied. Is there any other business, board members? If not, we're adjourned.